I'll just ask for a quick head nod. Chris and Marissa, are you able to hear me all right? Great. Okay, good. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. And I just want to start off by um, saying my name is Jonathan Ruthier. I'm the executive director for CSNI, and we are really excited to be able to offer today's program to all of you who are signing in. I know folks are still coming online here into the webinar. Um, but just, as you're signing in, I just wanted to let you know a few things about today's webinar. So we're really excited to be able to provide this content for everybody on the 4 fatigues of COVID-19. Chris McLaughlin, our presenter today, has done this presentation for a couple of other area agencies over the last month and has gotten really fantastic reviews from folks. And, just given the fact that we are just a little over a year into the pandemic, and I think folks are starting to really feel like they're not sure when the end is near, but it feels like we should be at a transition point. And there's been a lot of frustration expressed over the length of time that this has gone on. I thought this was really a timely topic to bring out to everybody. I wanted to mention a few things before we get started for everybody. First of all, I want to thank Marissa Berg from CSNI. Marissa has really taken the lead in setting up our webinar for today, getting the flyer created and sent out, and handling registration and all the logistics behind today. So Marissa, really, really grateful for all of your work to make this happen today. So thank you. Marissa is not done working on this yet. She's going to be our monitor today. So Marissa will be monitoring our Q&A. And so just as a point of education for folks, because we're using Zoom webinar, we have turned off the ability for folks to speak as participants. And if you have questions, we'd like for you to use the Q&A feature. Today's presentation is broken into 4 segments, and we'll have time at the end of each segment to get to questions that pertain to that area. So Marissa will monitor that and make sure that that Chris has that information to be able to respond to throughout the presentation today. So the other thing I really wanted to mention is that today's program is really for all of you participants, okay? I want you all to give yourselves permission to resist the temptation to multitask. I'd like you all just sort of start by taking a deep breath and just recognizing that you're here today to get something for you in the work that you do that's so valuable to the people that we serve. Today's for you, and take that opportunity. It's only 2 hours of your life, but it's 2 hours worth investing in. And I just want you all to give yourselves permission to just let down, absorb the material, ask questions, and know that you're appreciated. So with all of that said, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Chris McLaughlin. And Chris comes to us as the owner and operator of Inspired Consulting Group in Maine. Chris is a licensed social worker, a lifelong resident of Maine, and somebody who has spent the last 25 years working in a variety of clinical settings with mostly with children and adolescents and families, but doing behavioral health services, working inpatient and outpatient practices, private practice, public practice. And he's also been an adjunct faculty member at the University of Maine, Orono, as well as Husson University in Bangor, Maine. Chris is, as I mentioned, he's presented today's material to a number of area agencies, and we're really, really grateful and pleased to have him on board for today's offering. So without any further ado, Chris, I'm going to hand the reins to you, and I'll go back on mute. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. How's my sound?
Excellent.
All right.
Really
Excellent.
Clear.
Big thanks to Jonathan and Marissa for the invitation and the warm welcome. And again, thanks to all of you. I am so happy to be having this opportunity in New Hampshire to partner with organizations that are frankly new to me, and getting to learn so much about the organizations that make up the community support network there in New Hampshire. So I'm really excited to be here. This is material that I've become so passionate about in the last 12 months. As Jonathan states, this is a presentation I've now done several times for colleagues of yours in New Hampshire, as well as here in Maine. I believe we are recording the presentation, so I just want to make sure folks are aware of that as well. And we will have opportunity for interaction through the Q&A function. The nice thing about having a presentation that has 4 parts to it is that it gets us 4 opportunities at least to press pause and connect with one another. So please use that Q&A function that Jonathan talked about to put questions, and even if it's a placeholder for us to get back to later, drop your thoughts there. And I believe the chat feature is open for folks to just interact with the material in a different way. So if you could direct questions to Q&A and any other thoughts, even if it's personal reflections or personal comments, it's not uncommon for me to hear from members of the audience things like preach or yes, this, I'm feeling this every day. So please feel free to drop those comments in the chat, and we'll make sure to take a look at those as well. I want to get started by sharing some of my hopes for this material for you all. I love how Jonathan invited you all to be present. This really is about building provider resiliency. And so with that in mind, we're going to spend some time over the next couple hours talking about the impacts of COVID-19 on you and the populations you're serving. We're going to talk about the experience of telehealth for individuals of all ages. And we're going to talk about self-care and resiliency, not just for us as caregivers, but also for the populations we're working with. This is also the part of the conversation where I want to call out some of the elephants in our living room. I realize that it's odd to be talking about things like Zoom fatigue on Zoom. And it's really challenging in any of these platforms to fight that instinct to multitask or sneak a peek at your email or your cell phone. But as Jonathan said, I really want to invite folks to push back from the computer a little bit, grab your coffee, your tea, your water, your diet soda, whatever you're drinking, and just practice being present for the next couple hours. As soon as we are done, I am going to be sending these slides over to both Marissa and Jonathan. So I also don't want you to feel like you have to take copious notes or try to jot down everything that I'm saying. We will get the slides to you and make sure that you have copies of this material as well. So sit back, let's just be with one another for the next couple hours and see where these conversations take us. So as Jonathan said, we have rounded the corner of the 1-year anniversary of COVID-19. And I remember very early on in spring of 2020, starting to recognize that we were in this of more of a marathon experience than a race experience. And I know this is an analogy that often gets used, but I think it's been so fitting when we talk about this pandemic and we talk about the last year. So here's my first disclosure, and you'll hear several from me over the next couple hours together. I have never, nor will I ever, run a marathon, full or half. It's just not how I'm wired. I tend to only run if I'm being chased, and fortunately, that doesn't happen all that often in my current life. But I have really close friends that have run their fair share of marathons, and I've been fortunate to accompany them up and down the East Coast to places like Disney and Boston and New York to be part of their marathon journey. And I've learned a lot being a professional marathon spectator. I've always been so interested in this idea that marathon runners know their body so well. They have this down to a science. They know their course, they're well researched, they know how their bodies work, they're very introspective, they're very self-aware. They can tell you on their playlist when a certain song comes on their playlist what mile marker they should be coming up to or passing. They are just so prepared. And oftentimes, marathon runners also have literal tool belts filled with potions and goos and liquids and gums that are all there to help them get a little bit more energy in their gas tank right when they need it most. They really know their bodies well. And then I think about this pandemic and this experience, and I can't help but notice the differences in this experience compared to what I know about marathon runners. None of us signed up for the course, and we have heard over and over again that we are in unprecedented times with no ability to really reflect on baseline or have any way of comparing anything like this experience before. We didn't ask to be running this marathon. We didn't ask to be running it with the people that we're running it with. We don't know the course. We can't even tell you where the water stops are or where the best porta potty breaks are on this course. It's that foreign to us. And for me, month after month after month of putting one foot in front of the other and wondering, is the finish line on the other end of this bend? Are we rounding this corner? And being so disappointed to not see a finish line ahead for us. And so I have spent the better part of the last year working with teams and public schools, other community-based organizations and healthcare systems on this idea of energy and this idea of what is it going to take to keep our energy up, to keep our gas tank filled, and to avoid the energy vampires like the four fatigues of COVID-19 that we're going to talk about today. So I want you to keep this idea, this image of this marathon, and this idea that we're putting one foot in front of the other, we're trudging forward. And if there's any marathon runners out there, what you know is forward is the only direction available to you. For so many of us, sitting down in the middle of the road and saying, I ain't doing this anymore, is just not an option. So as Jonathan so eloquently pointed out, this session is for you. We are going to try to put a little bit of energy back in those tanks. So when I think about the last year and I think about what it is that we have been confronted with and thinking about, I remember that 2020 started with a bang. 2020 started with a real sense of urgency and crisis. If you remember, Australia was overrun with wildfires. And here in the United States, we had wildfires up and down the West Coast from California to Washington State and starting to creep eastward. I have good friends in the Colorado area, and they talked often last winter about actually being able to smell the smoke coming from those wildfires. And that sense of crisis, that sense of urgency certainly followed us as we progressed into the spring, as we came to get to know this word coronavirus and got COVID-19 and words like pandemic and surge into our jargon, into our lexicon. But it wasn't just COVID-19 that dominated the airwaves of 2020. For many of us, we saw other fires of a different kind popping up around the country. Racial unrest, issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, healthcare disparities, and violence to members of minority communities also contributed to this overwhelming sense of crisis of 2020. We had an election year that was also unprecedented, unlike anything that we've ever seen before in modern times, all taking place under this umbrella of this virus. And as we come into 2021 with vaccines, the topic of the day, things that we're really excited about. And at the risk of starting this presentation off as a little bit of a buzzkill, I have to say that I am of the belief that the vaccine in our industry isn't quite the finish line that it might feel like for other folks. In our industry of behavioral health, I think the vaccine is probably a really nice, fancy water stop on this marathon. But those of us that are in this field know that we will be managing the impacts of this virus long after vaccines get in all of our arms. And it's because of some of these fatigues that we're going to dig into a little bit more today. It's because of those energy vampires that we as providers in the healthcare industry have to really be very intentional in monitoring our gas tanks and making sure that we're on this marathon for all the right reasons. So, what are the four fatigues of COVID-19? Well, today we're going to talk about Zoom fatigue, pandemic fatigue, moral fatigue, and finally, compassion fatigue. And again, these are my energy vampires as we are on this course together, walking or running this marathon. These are the forces working against us. But I have to press pause. And like any good presenter, I have to show you cute pictures of my dogs who have been my office mates quite unexpectedly over the last year, who absolutely model for me and my family what fatigue looks like in these times. They're quite experts at fatigue, no doubt. So we're going to start with Zoom fatigue. We're going to talk a little bit about just what makes this virtual world that we're living in such a drain on our ability to be on this course, this marathon successfully. Here's just a funny diagram of a Zoom meeting. If it's anything like the meetings I'm part of, that 2% of actual meeting content is sometimes even generous. There's so much else going on in this virtual world that, as you'll soon hear from me, contribute to how Zoom or any other remote platform, whatever platform you're using, why this is taking a toll on us. And I want to break it down to 5 distinct areas. Challenges within the virtual world that can be lumped as human nature issues, technology issues, environmental issues, professional issues, and finally, interpersonal issues. So let's start with human nature issues, right? What is it about humans that work against us as we come into this virtual world? Well, here's the reality, gang. We as humans spend more time looking at ourselves than others. It's just how we're wired. When we have a constant mirror image of ourselves live on the screen in front of us, that is where our minds and eyes and therefore attention goes. And it's because we are often our own biggest critics. We become so hyper focused on deficits that we see in this image that's portrayed back. Geez, I need a haircut. My eyeglasses are dirty. My cowlick is starting to poke through. Did I wear this shirt yesterday? I can't remember. And on and on and on. And as we become hyper focused on our own deficits, our confidence decreases as the distractions in our own brain increases. It reinforces negative self-images that we've already had about ourselves for years. And here's the other reality. Everyone else's homes, their bookshelves, what's on their wall, their pets or their kids crawling up on laps or asking for snacks are just so dang interesting. And for many of us, this is the first time we've really been allowed in to our coworkers, our colleagues' personal spaces. And that's fascinating. The first time I Zoomed with my boss here in Maine, I couldn't stop looking at her walls and her bookshelf and what's that on her desk. And it just totally demanded all of my attention. Then we have technology issues. There are just simple, basic challenges with logging in and accessing this technology. We all have different internet access and bandwidths at our personal spaces and even in some of our professional space. We're not all equal in how we access this technology. And the etiquette of how we exist and how we are working together in this virtual space is often inconsistent. And frankly, it's not clear. Things like, do I mute? How do I get the attention? Am I allowed to have a background screen? Should I have a picture on my image? Is this a camera on or a camera off kind of meeting? And so what I appreciate about Zoom webinar is a lot of that is taken and those decisions are made for you. It's not an option to have your camera on. It's not an option to have your mute off. But for many of us in just the day-to-day world of going from one meeting to the next, it's often very unclear. What are we supposed to do here? The learning curves for this technology are very, very steep. I remember early on in the pandemic, working with my mom, who lives in the southern part of the state here in Maine, on how to set up her Zoom. She's a public school employee. So trying to figure out, she was embarrassed to ask her team. She had no idea how to turn the camera on or off, or she was like one of those Saturday Night Live skits where the nose is pressed right against the camera and all you see is one eye. That was my mom. It took so much of her energy worrying about, was she even going to look professional in this space? And part of that was because every platform that we use in the virtual space is just a little bit different from the last. How we mute in one platform and one software looks different from the next. How we arrange our camera or see our colleagues, everyone is just a little different. And that anxiety, as we see the invite for a meeting on another platform that we might not be as familiar with, is another drain on our reserves. And then we have everyone's favorite, the distortions, delays, and echoes. If your days are anything like mine, it's a rare day where I get through a full day of Zoom meetings without somebody having a challenge with their technology or their internet. But what's interesting about these distortions, delays, and echoes is the impact they have on us. It contributes to our feelings of isolation and our anxiety. Is my technology going to work? Am I going to come across as professional? It reinforces our feelings of disconnection. It disrupts our ability to interpret the social cues that we get when we're in person with one another and process and understand nonverbal body language. Our perceptions are confused. And speaking to you all as a group of super empathic individuals, you know that on a subconscious basis, a lot of empathy is built with our ability to mirror the actions of the person that we're trying to work with. And that's hard to do when their screen is frozen. And you all know, like I know, when Zoom freezes, it never freezes on your best side, your most photogenic side. It always freezes when you have the worst facial expression possible. I think Zoom does that on purpose. I think they have some photo album somewhere of millions of people's contorted, distorted faces. Our brains have to work overtime to fill in all of these gaps. But here's the punchline to all of these technology issues. It's just a constant reminder of this situation that we are in together. It contributes to pandemic fatigue. Every time there's a glitch in the technology, we curse under our breath. And it brings us back to the reality that this pandemic has forced us to live within. And then we have the environmental issues. This has been one of my favorite memes of the last year. World is on fire, but we've got our coffee and just pretending everything's fine. As you know, it's not always easy to control the environment remotely compared to when we're live and in person. And by that, I mean, in pre-COVID times when we would meet together, we were able to control the lighting, the heat, the seating arrangements. We could close the door if things in the hallway were too loud or we wanted a bit more privacy. It was really easy to control the professional environment. Well, as you all have lived over the last year, you know that controlling the environment remotely can really be challenging. It contributes to this idea of environmental oversharing from both us and those that we're connecting with. How many of you have had your child jump in the room as you're in a meeting that you're trying to be super professional with because they want a snack or their show is over? Or just as you get ready to present, your doorbell rings and your package is being delivered and your dogs go absolutely ballistic. Or your partner walks by and they may not be in the most appropriate state of dress for your early morning meetings, but they didn't realize that you were on, and the only room you have in your house to Zoom in happens to be right out in the bedroom. It really is visual stimulation overload. And again, it's our pets, our kids, our partners, our neighbors, our doorbells, our driveways. All of these things that make up our at-home environment that we have taken for granted before 2020 have now come back to haunt us with a fury. And what it does is it forces us, even on a very unconscious level, to feel like we have to overcorrect. We have to be the most professional we've ever been. And we sometimes go out of our way to try to micromanage our environment. We threaten kids. We put dogs in crates. We threaten partners. We put signs on our door, do not bother me. All steps that take more energy to try to get the environment conducive to our workspace. And then we have the professional issues. I believe that one, at least for me, one of the biggest challenges with remote technology, while we have had so many silver linings to this, I really miss the informal pre and post meeting conversations that I had with my colleagues. It was those few minutes as folks were gathering in the conference room where we were able to connect, check in about our favorite shows, what we had for dinner. Have we seen so and so yet? And then when meetings get done, and those few minutes we have with our colleagues, our work family, as we transition to the next event. This really equates to a loss of relationship building time with colleagues and with stakeholders. It makes it more challenging to find those in the moment discussions that sometimes are so invaluable to barrier busting. I bet many of you were able to solve so many problems for the individuals that you're working with or the teams you're connected with, because you were able to have a 45-second conversation with somebody in the hallway who had just the resource you wanted or needed to support that individual. Now we have to go out of our way and text or schedule one more meeting or try to catch somebody on the phone to be able to solve some of those challenges. I think for me, it's really strained some of the relationships we've had with our departments, our employers. It's brought to light the demands on our time with homeschooling and childcare and trying to care for extended family members, attending to pets. All of those things that were really well protected and kind of happened behind the scenes in the workplace are now out for everybody to see and experience in parallel with you. And for many of us, it's still quite uncomfortable. And finally, we have the interpersonal issues connected with Zoom technology. I don't know about you all, but there are absolutely days where I feel like Tom Hanks from Castaway, and I just know when I roll out of bed that day, I pray it's going to be a camera off day, that I don't have any meetings where my camera has to be on because I just can't pull it together that day. In this Zoom world, it often feels like we're talking at each other and not with. Today is a great example of that. It would be disingenuous to say that I feel like this is the same as presenting to you all together in person. I can't see any of you. I feel like I'm talking at you, not with you. And I know that because of this format, all of your eyes are on me. I'm the one on stage right now. And for you all that have experienced this sensation, you know that that in and of itself, while I love it, is really exhausting. There's this sense that we're getting lost in each other's conversations, and we may not be as fully present as we want to or intend to be. The differences between introverts and extroverted styles get really reinforced in this space. It probably won't surprise any of you that I tend to be on the more extroverted side of things. But because I know that about myself, I have to work really hard in some of my professional Zoom meetings to sit back and not dominate the conversation. Conversely, the introverts among us have to work just as hard to make sure that their opinions, their voices are heard. It's too easy in a Zoom room to sit in the back of the room, in the back of the class. So we've all got to work harder to manage our styles. And working harder means more energy. We fight each other for eye contact in this virtual space. And these Hollywood squares, these Brady Bunch squares that we're all living in are different. What I see on my screen is very different than what you see on yours. So I may think that I'm looking Marissa right in the eye when we're talking. She has no idea. But because a lot of this happens beneath our level of consciousness, I'm going to work really harder on my end to make sure that Marissa knows that I'm talking at her and talking with her and looking at her in the eye. But again, she has no idea. How would she? So I believe that Zoom fatigue is really about working smarter, not harder, saving energy instead of expending more. And it begins with boundaries. It begins with setting clear expectations with family members and employers about when you're on or off. And if you're working 100% remotely, get rid of this idea in your head as well as in others that you are on call 24/7. This is part of that professional overcorrection that I was talking about. You see, many of us may feel a little twinge of guilt that we're working remotely, especially when we have colleagues like myself in healthcare who have been on site and working on the front lines of this pandemic. So I may feel like I should be dealing with my email at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, even though I'm totally toast and have no business responding to email at that time of the evening. So I've had to work really hard with myself and with my coworkers that just like my day was done when I commuted and worked on site, I need to have that same boundary when I'm working remotely. To be able to set up your virtual space for success. And I know that not everyone has the ability to carve out an extra bedroom to be able to facilitate working from home. I've done this presentation for people who are in dining rooms, at kitchen tables. I've had folks from their bathroom, literally in their closet, because it was the only space they had available to do this sort of meeting time. But regardless of what that space is or looks like, I want to encourage people to make sure that it's set up for success, that it's decluttered, that it's dedicated, that you've checked camera lighting and sound quality, making sure that you don't have to work so hard to overcorrect the professional aspects of this work. I love this concept of the power hour. finding your personal power hour and using it to your advantage. By that, I mean, you know yourself. Are you a night owl? Are you an early bird? Do you get that sudden burst of energy right after lunch? Know yourself and leverage yourself. If you're an early bird, as I've become with every year I get older, I've carved out my mornings. I get my best work done between 7 and 8:30 in the morning. I don't schedule meetings where possible. I get caught up. I get my to-do list created. I get organized. And conversely, I have colleagues that are real night owls. They have to wait till the kids are in bed, their spouses are in bed, the dogs have wound down. And then they sit at their table and bust out some of their best work at 9, 10 o'clock at night. Leverage it. Know yourself, know your body, know your brain, and then schedule yourself to match your personal power hour. Find ways to chunk up your time. We have this illusion as humans that we're really good at multitasking. And as you all probably know, the research and science shows that multitasking is really a farce. So because of that, I like, at least for me, to chunk up time. I do all of my emails in one sitting. I return all my phone calls in one sitting. If there's a project that requires me to create something, I do that at one sitting. I try really hard to not go from email to phone call to email to project time to a face-to-face meeting to a clinical session with an individual I'm working with. Because that ability to switch hats so quickly on the fly just doesn't exist for any of us. So chunking up that time and combining those like-minded activities is a great way to conserve energy. So is setting up short-term and achievable goals, getting really clear what you got to finish for today or finish for the week. And how about applying that power hour concept in your personal life? I think kids and pets and family members and spouses and partners would appreciate 1 solid hour of your time instead of you feeling like you've got to sprinkle 2 or 3 minutes throughout the day to keep them happy, to keep the interruptions down. And again, as you heard me say at the beginning, be clear with others and ask for that clarity if you need it about what are the rules of the virtual road you're traveling together. Things like cameras on or off, mute. Can I use a funny filter or a background picture? Do I raise my hand? Do I wave my hands like back and forth to get your attention? If you don't know the rules of the meeting, ask right from the beginning. I promise you, others in the meeting are also wondering. And it alleviates the time and energy it takes to try to figure it out as you go. I also have been sharing strategies for keeping kids engaged during remote learning. I know that a lot of folks are still working with kids at home, but I also have heard feedback in the time that I've been with my new friends in New Hampshire that some of the information on this particular slide have been really helpful for the individuals you're working with and serving. It's providing you some good tips to share with the families and individuals you're working with. So I like to find opportunities for choice when I'm working with others. You've already heard me say a couple times now, things about camera on versus camera off. I like to make it fun when I'm working with youth or with folks receiving services from me, backgrounds and filter effects, keeping it really fresh and different and unique and fun each time. I work really hard to find ways to get real-time feedback from those people I'm working with, things like the chat box or asking the polls that Zoom allows you to do, giving the thumbs up button. slow down, speed up. All of these features that some of these platforms have for real-time feedback is really important. I like to create virtual plans on how to ask for help. And I don't just mean that from a crisis safety perspective, but also just, hey, Chris, slow down. Can you say that again? I don't think I heard you the first time. What did you just say? What's their plan for letting me know that they need something from me? I like to integrate a whole lot of breaks with fun kid yoga or quick mindfulness exercises, and just any way possible to get the wiggles out. And as you all know, the wiggles is not a phenomenon just for little kids. Adolescents, teenagers, young adults, and all of us get the wiggles every now and again. We don't call it that after a certain age, but that's certainly what it feels like. Just the need to get up and stretch and move around, to keep healthy snacks and hydration nearby. I work with some amazing occupational therapists at one of my jobs, and they are magicians with gum and hard sour candy, ways to integrate little sensory breaks in the day, a little wake up to your senses, little bursts of energy, thinking about that marathon runner. And I also have to be really mindful of the youth's need for privacy and safety in this virtual world, and keep in mind the differences between internet access or the availability of devices between households. Some of my meetings are on shaky cell phones. Others are on lap held Kindles or iPads on somebody's lap. And then others are with mounted cameras, slow and steady, but it's different each time. I also like to take every opportunity I can to just provide a little bit of reminders about addressing privacy in this virtual world. For a lot of the individuals that we're working with, I think it's very easy for us to make assumptions between camera off, meaning engagement off or attention off, to assume that if the camera's off, they're not paying attention to us anymore. But for many of the individuals we work with, cameras off is less about attention and more about privacy. We work with individuals who have holes in the walls, ceilings literally crumbling around them, dirty dishes or party dishes from the weekend before, or families that are having to heat their home in the winter months with electric sources, because at least here in Maine, electric companies can't disconnect electricity during the winter months. And for a lot of the youth that we're supporting and working with, their camera off is really about protection from bullying or being exposed to the cruelness of their peers. So this brings us to the first breaking point of our 4 fatigues. And I just want to give an opportunity to respond to any questions that may have come up.
So we haven't had questions that have popped up for me, but there have been so many people who have just echoed how much what you've been saying is resonating. Comments about earlier on, you were mentioning having to be critical of yourself. My body image and self-talk have taken a nosedive since all of this. Comments about several of you have put, in the chat box, worrying about the environment that you're in, and how are people going to perceive that? People are going to see your pets are walking across the keyboard or barking, dogs are barking. You don't know what the environment around you looks like to other people. So
Yeah.
it's really resonating with people, it seems.
And I think it's so important for us, and this is part of that human nature piece as well. Let's face it, we all are a little narcissistic as humans. And so what's going on in our brains, we forget are happening with everybody else's brain at the exact same time. And so for me, there's a little bit of humor. There's a sense of humor here, especially when you're with coworkers and your work family, to be able to just live in the moment with them. And if that cat walks across the screen, to call it out. It is what it is. It's happening. It's just part of this environment that we're all in. And I also resonate with the person who talked about body image. It's been a tough year we're out of our routines. We're out of practice with everything. We've started here in my house, we've started walking the dogs now that the snow is finally gone. And I am sore from just going a quick loop in a very short neighborhood that I live in. So we're getting back into those practices, but I think awareness is a real big piece to this. And if you know if you know that you are going to be your own biggest critic in the moment, turn your camera off. Don't put yourself in the position to talk down to yourself. So keep the oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I was just going to say, just before we go into the next section, two quick things. One is, I'm pretty sure everybody knows what the Amazon delivery schedule is in my neighborhood now, because my dog barks every single time the Amazon driver comes. And so anybody that I've been on Zoom meetings with probably knows about that. The other thing is that, just as folks are participating in today's webinar, I just want to remind folks, because I didn't say this in the beginning, but when you're using the chat feature, if you, when you're entering a chat, click and you put in the to field, you have different options. One is all panelists and the other is all panelists and attendees. And if folks would just use the all panelists and attendees in the to field, then everyone can benefit from your chats. And I know that it's just helpful sometimes. This is a great way to sort of engage with each other while we're also engaging in a presentation, right? And so if you want to be able to share your thoughts with everyone else who's here today, but just make sure you select all panelists and attendees when you do a chat.
Thanks for that reminder, Jonathan. So keep the conversations going. I appreciate folks echoing some of this and relating to all of this. Keep the conversations going. We're going to move into some additional topics, but we'll absolutely, if you think of questions or want to come back to this, we can absolutely do that. So our next energy vampire, our next fatigue, is pandemic fatigue. And this is that concept where, frankly speaking, we are over it. We are just done talking about it, done seeing it on the news, done reading about it, done hearing people go on and on and on about it. Our desire to move on and get, quote, back to normal is what feeds some of our pandemic fatigue. And the longer this marathon has gone on, the bigger that pandemic fatigue has felt. Pandemic fatigue contributes to us being news blind. Pandemic fatigue is what some folks struggle with when they still have to wear the mask, or they still have to respect some degree of physical distancing, or they're still doing takeout instead of eating in. Pandemic fatigue can be a barrier, a challenge to safety, not because we're deliberately being oppositional or that we're deliberately breaking rules, but it's because we're rewiring or trying to rewire our brain to get into this post-pandemic place. So I've encouraged folks to just continue to stay vigilant, especially those of us in the healthcare industry and behavioral health. We've got to be good models for those that we're working with and be good models for our community. We've got to maintain safety for those key moments. And I think about the past year and I think about voting in November. And I think about those fall winter holidays. And now I think about vaccine rollout and how much energy it took for all of us together as a community to try to keep these really essential and important events safe. Again, it's been about modeling for those we serve. And it's also been about validating the effects of COVID-19. Being able to engage in conversation about, yeah, I'm so sick of this too. And I know it's still really important for me to wear my mask. As we've collaborated to unify the message, whether we've done so again, consciously or not, we've had to come together as a community, as a healthcare community, to make sure that we are saying the same thing, that we're being good models, and that we are preparing for this continued marathon ahead. I do an activity with some of the other groups I work with where we are able to have a little bit more interaction just to examine the impacts of pandemic fatigue. So I'm going to put up, by way of example here, I'm going to put up 5 words. And I want you to take a breath. And I want you to pay attention to what your body or your mind does when you see and hear these words. Pandemic, surge, social distancing, personal protective equipment, and everyone's favorite, remote learning. Did you notice an eye roll wanting to happen? Did you notice a little flurge of irritation? My guess is that for many, if not most of us here today, these words no longer carry the same level of anxiety or fear that they once carried earlier on in this pandemic. Now these words tend to carry a little bit of a different connotation: annoyance, irritation. Are we still talking about this now? And that's pandemic fatigue. Absolutely. And it's right where you're supposed to be at this stage of the marathon. What I know from my marathon running friends is that after so many miles on the course, they're over it too. They know the finish is important, if for no other reason than pride and a sense of accomplishment. They know they've got to keep running, but they're sick of the course too. Another concept that I've been talking a lot about in the past year, as we think about how do we best validate the impacts of COVID-19, has been this idea of grief and loss. I want to be honest and say that I have sadness when I think about the loss of life attributed to this pandemic. It's been staggering, not just here in Maine or New England, but our country and the globe. And that's not necessarily the grief and loss that I'm talking about. The grief and loss that I'm talking about associated with COVID-19 is really more about the loss of normalcy, the loss of predictability, the loss of consistency, the loss of control, and the loss of rituals. By now, 100% of us have had our COVID birthday. We've celebrated a COVID anniversary. We've done holidays under the lens of COVID. We know youth, whether they're youth we know professionally or personally, who have had athletic seasons, chorus and band concerts, school plays, dances, semi-formals, proms, track and field days, step-up days for the next class, and graduations get postponed and canceled because of this pandemic. We know the look of sadness in the faces of our loved ones when talking about what was supposed to be and didn't happen. I have found that this model of grief and loss that comes from Elisabeth Kubler-Ross, that again was initially developed from a death and dying perspective. I know that this stage-based model has been able to help me process through some of this grief and loss that I've been feeling. It allows me to recognize those mornings that I wake up just irritable, just a bear, for no reason, not at a reason I can certainly point a finger at, or a person I can point a finger at. And then I remind myself that, wait a second, anger is a stage of grief and loss. And then those days where I wake up and it just, nothing feels okay in that day. It's beyond being bummed. It's feeling like you're treading water, lost at sea, trudging through mud. And then I remind myself, wait a second, sadness is the most appropriate response to loss. We are supposed to feel sad when something that we have come to hope for or expect gets taken from us. And as I work towards my own acceptance, which again doesn't mean that I'm okay with the loss, but the acceptance of the reality of the situation, as I work towards that, I recognize that I'm not going through this in a vacuum. This isn't my silo. This isn't my island that I'm on by myself. The reality is that this stage, these stages of grief and loss, give us a common language, give us a vocabulary to talk with one another, to better understand our feelings, and to show empathy and compassion to those around us. Everyone is experiencing some form of loss attributed to this pandemic, literally every one of us. So as we seek to validate the effects of pandemic fatigue and understand why somebody just might be so over this, why we might be feeling over this, some of it comes back to this idea of grief and loss, a desire to get beyond the grief, to stop the loss. I have found that this model, at least for me on a very personal level, has been something I can hold on to. This has been my life jacket, my buoy in these feelings of some days treading water. And I would encourage folks to dig into this and lean in to some of the uncomfortable feelings when talking about grief and loss. I know that here in the United States, we don't do grief very well. We don't do loss very well. And as a social worker, I'm embarrassed to say that there are times, probably more times than I choose to remember, where when I'm in the presence of somebody else's grief, I hand them the box of tissues. I offer to leave them alone for a few minutes so they can collect themselves, and then I'll come back to finish the conversation. I've sent that message that their grief is uncomfortable for me and I want to stop it from happening or get away from it. So I've made a commitment over the past year to not walk away from the grief of those around me, but to lean in and offer some empathy, to know what that feels like, and to be able to sit with them and myself and process this experience together, to try to get some support through this process. I think during pandemic fatigue, it's also really important to share ways to keep up the vigilance of these safety protocols. So I offer 3 Ps on even now, a year later, trying to work with others who may be a little challenged with their mask compliance, different age, different developmental levels of the individuals we're serving. So here's some strategies that I share with you to practice, pretend, and play through the mask wearing process. Finding styles, experimenting, increasing tolerance level, playing dress up, mask albums, photo albums, or selfies, having fun with it where possible. But here's my pro tip. Exposure is everything. Even though it doesn't feel normal or right to have to still be wearing a mask all the time for many individuals, what we know is that if the mask is something that's crumpled up in your pocket or your purse, and you put it on at the last minute, grumbling and complaining as you walk into the grocery store, we can't be surprised when the children around us who see us doing this act in very similar ways. The same is true about supporting physical distancing, finding ways to make physical distancing as fun as possible. Scavenger hunts, gigantic tic-tac-toe boards, using hula hoops to mark where we want folks to stand or be, or really lightweight camp chairs. To prevent us from drifting as humans, we have this tendency as we're standing in a circle to pull that circle in tighter and tighter and tighter without even knowing we're doing it. And so hula hoops or camp chairs reinforce that message of keeping some kind of distance. Or games like Frisbee, where I don't know if you've ever tried to play Frisbee from less than 3 or so feet. It's not a good idea. To scavenger hunts, to get individuals out and moving and spread out. Or trying to find ways to create individualized but distanced greetings, or ways to show somebody that we're saying hello or thinking of them. Again, it's all about modeling. It's all about accepting that the message around some of these things is still evolving. In our state here in Maine, there's a lot of conversation of 3 feet versus 6 feet right now in our public schools. And, you know, I've had to just make a very conscious decision to let other people way above my pay grade make those decisions. It's my role to help model whatever those around me say in the moment is the most safe. So that brings us to the end of our second fatigue of COVID-19. Any thoughts or questions about pandemic fatigue or these ideas of grief and loss? I'm catching up on the chat, and I see you all. Those of you participating, I see you and I feel you. So I'll move into, Marissa, did you want to add anything? I'm sorry.
No, I wanted to let you know all the conversation is in the chat.
Got it. So I'm going to move into our third fatigue of COVID-19. But again, feel free to come back to this. I'm presenting a lot of information today. And I also know that just the way all of our minds work, it may take some time to process different parts of this. So keep the chat going and feel free to use that Q&A at any time on any of these topics. But we're going to talk about moral fatigue now. Moral fatigue is that concept where it never really feels like there's a right direction. The right thing to do is not really clear. It's sometimes described as a damned if you do, damned if you don't decision. An example I think about for moral fatigue that's not connected to COVID-19 is I think about our role as mandated reporters. whether you work with adults or with youth. And those times where we've been confronted with something that kind of sits in our gut and makes us wonder, geez, should I report this? And half of our brain thinks about the impact that that will have on the individual we're serving or their family. Will we lose their trust? Will they fire us from their services? Will they ever trust providers again? Will I make it worse by reporting? And then the other half of our brain thinks about, this is our role. This is our mandate. This is the law. And if I don't report, what if it gets worse? Is this individual I'm working with in danger? I think that's something that we all have experienced and know that feeling of wrestling and sometimes laying awake at night, wondering, did you make the right decision? That's moral fatigue. So now let's think of pandemic related moral fatigue. I think about the grocery store, something so mundane that in the light of this pandemic has been transitioned to something that for many of us was horrifying. If you think back of the idea of going to the grocery store in March or April or even May of last year, if you're anything like me, it froze me in my tracks. We put it off as long as possible. We emptied our pantry, had some really interesting dinner combinations just to avoid the grocery store, not knowing the rules, not knowing if I was going to get sick, if I was going to bring COVID back home, expose other people, and all of those what if scenarios. What if I get sick? What if I make somebody else sick? What if the bags are contaminated? What if the food is contaminated? And on and on and on. And now, 12 months later, while still kind of annoying, going to the grocery store doesn't feel as taxing as it once did. Going to the grocery store has become kind of a chore again. But as this pandemic has gone on, there have been other replacement decisions that can take so much of our energy. Sending kids to school or homeschooling, doing those travel plans, attending social events with friends or family, visiting our loved ones who may live outside of our bubble, running that quick errand to the post office, allowing kids to have play dates, or yes, even working on site or staying remote. These are just a small number of everyday decisions that so many of us have been challenged by. We've had to work harder to make these decisions that pre-COVID we would do in a snap of a finger. So much of moral fatigue in this pandemic has really been tied to fear, and rightly so. With, again, as I said when we were talking about the marathon analogy, this is unprecedented. And information was changing daily. It was almost hard to keep up with all the changes of information a year ago. And so much of it was based in fear. So when I'm confronting fear for myself or for those I'm working with, I like to take a step back. I like to remember what fear is. At its root, what is fear? Fear is a well-developed response to a threat. And I say well-developed because fear has been part of our species for thousands of years. We've all heard about fight, flight, or freeze. Those reactions are what has kept our species moving forward over time. Fear has quite literally kept many of us alive. And no, we're not all confronted by bears outside of the cave, stampeding bison, or any other fear or threat from thousands of years ago. But I say, if fear has truly been part of what has kept our species moving, alive, be forward, I say let's embrace it. Let's own it. Fear has taken on such a negative connotation. Fear keeps us alive, so let's celebrate it. But at the same time, we can work to reduce stress levels around us. We can integrate humor into our lives. We can find those trusted colleagues and coworkers that we can confide in. We can stay really focused on those things that we can control. Get a good night's sleep. Everything feels so much better when well rested. We can remember and remind others that all feelings are okay, but at the end of the day, facts matter. And we can separate that feeling of fear and we can embrace it and acknowledge that the facts still take precedent. How do we fight moral fatigue? How do we combat this? Well, acknowledge that it's a problem. Own that we can be sometimes paralyzed by decisions that we think we should be making relatively quickly or easily. And remember, we're not alone in feeling this. In April of 2020, every single person in that grocery store wished they were someplace else. I would put good money on that. None of us wanted to be there. Slow down, go easy on ourselves, give ourselves permission to put decision making off. If there's a decision that we're struggling personally or professionally, take a step back from it. Seek supervision, seek support, seek a trusted colleague. Taking the pressure off ourselves from having to make split decisions or decisions that are made in the same amount of time they used to be made is a huge part of fighting moral fatigue. It's part of being gentle on ourselves, going easy on ourselves. And then making sure that if there are barriers that are still in the way of our making good, sound, ethical decisions, like a policy or a procedure, making sure that we have addressed them adequately, talked to leadership about it, and moved on from it. I'm catching up on the chat now, and I'm seeing that a lot of folks know exactly what we're talking about when we talk about moral fatigue. The challenge of building relationships with coworkers, how to train and onboard new staff remotely. Are you doing the right thing? Are they going to feel like they're getting the best experience at your organization in this pandemic? I really appreciate somebody putting in the chat that sensation of feeling judged for decisions that are made, that other people are criticizing you for, whether verbally or silently. I talked a lot about this last fall as we were getting ready to move into the fall and winter holidays, and liked to remind folks that for so many of us, the decisions that we present publicly took a lot of personal time and agony. Again, I'll think about my mom, thinking about Thanksgiving. We have always had Thanksgiving together. And again, my mom and family live 2.5 hours south of me here in Bangor. And my mom agonized over Thanksgiving dinner, knowing that my 94-year-old grandfather is also a part of these events. And it wasn't until we had a really honest phone conversation where I remember saying to her, Mom, call it. Stop worrying about it. Stop agonizing about it. Stop trying to plan around it. It's okay to do something different this year, and we'll be back together next year. And I could hear on the other end of the phone that the weight of the world had been taken off her shoulders. And she confided in me that she had been awake for nights, worrying about how she was going to make Thanksgiving dinner work for the family this year. And frankly, she just needed permission to step away from the decision, that she wasn't going to be judged for making that decision that in her mind, and probably in reality, was the best decision to be made. And yeah, Amy, it did feel like a war zone, running kids back and forth, having individuals that you're working with, looking for supports for those individuals, trying to keep services running as consistently as possible. It was a battle zone out there, and it's exhausting. These are all those energy vampires that are working against us on this COVID course. So our fourth fatigue and final fatigue of this pandemic is compassion fatigue. By now, you know that I'm somebody that talks in pictures. I really like metaphor, and I really like this idea of an image to really hammer the point home. And so I thought about the image that you're seeing now, and it's something that I may have taken for granted before COVID-19, but it means something very differently to me now. It's something that the airline industry, it's a concept that the airline industry has known and embraced for far longer than those of us in behavioral health, in human services. In the airline industry, it's a real simple concept. If you're in flight and there's a crisis, and those yellow masks drop from the ceiling, your one and only instruction is to secure your mask first before assisting children or dependents in your care. For the airline industry, this is a matter of life and death. But the parallel here in our world is no longer lost on me. What the airline industry knows is that in times of crisis, if the adult in charge is not well cared for, youth are in jeopardy. Let me say that again. If the adult in charge is not well cared for, youth are in jeopardy. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it in the airline industry. And so now I think about this pandemic, and I think about how much we've tried to be talking about the importance of self-care. But until I saw this image and applied it to this pandemic, self-care just sounded like a punchline to me. It just sounded like one more buzzword. I now understand and feel and believe quite deeply that those of us that are working in this field, who have other people who have lives that depend on us, quite literally in some cases, we can't afford to not put our mask on first. We can't afford to not make sure that we are well cared for as we try to support them. We're going to talk more about this as we talk about compassion fatigue, but I want to make sure that this image stays with you. I've encouraged people to actually cut this image out, put it on your computer screen, hang it on your wall, put it on your office door, laminate it for your car. We've got to embrace this idea that as adults, with others depending on us, it is not optional for us anymore to not make sure that we are getting the care that we need to function safely as we seek to support those around us. I just saw a chat comment came in that I want to give my own preach to, because this concept absolutely applies to leadership as well. It's not the children in your care that we're talking about, but it's your teams, it's your direct reports, it's your staff. If you as a leader are not well cared for, the team that you're supporting is also in jeopardy. I don't mean this to be a controversial image or a controversial subject. Again, for me, as this pandemic evolved, my thinking about this did as well. I no longer think of self-care as negotiable. I hear over and over again from adults, from educators and teaching staff, from folks in the field on the front lines who just don't feel like they have the time to dedicate to self-care, that it feels like it's one more thing that they're yelling at. And I hear that loud and clear. And I also come back to this image. It doesn't change the fact that those around us depend on us to have our oxygen masks on and functioning. Because here's the reality. No one has been immune to the impacts and the effects of this pandemic. Back in August, the CDC showed that suicide and suicidal ideation, thoughts of suicide, were up. 1 in 4 young adults defined by ages 18 to 24 say that they seriously considered suicide in the 30 days before this particular survey. That was 3 times higher than the year 2019. But that number has honestly horrified me since the statistic has come out. 25% of young adults seriously considering suicide. Around the same time in the summer, the Census Bureau put some data out that showed that 1 in 3 Americans, adults of all ages, reporting symptoms of depression and anxiety, and again, up more than 3 times from that first half, that first same time period of 2019. But then, not a few months later, the CDC said, hold on, it's actually closer to 41% of adults struggling with at least one behavioral health condition: anxiety, depression, substance use, unhealthy relationships with food or exercise, or suicidal thoughts. 41%, 4 out of 10 adults. And those 41% directly credit this pandemic and the impacts of isolation and physical distancing and stay-at-home orders and the change of routine. And I would say grief and loss as well. Credit this pandemic for those symptoms. 41%. No one is immune. And over the last year, we've seen so many celebrities like Michelle Obama and Anthony Porosky and Michael Phelps, who I now see on the commercials all the time again, who have publicly gone to say, I have been struggling during this pandemic. Michael Phelps gave an interview last summer with ESPN, and he said that, quote, this is the most overwhelmed I've ever felt. And I think to myself, if one of the most decorated Olympic champions of our time is struggling during the pandemic, I guess it's okay that I have been too. We also know that educators, folks on the front lines of this pandemic, have also had a particularly difficult time. 77% of teachers said that they were worried about their own health in returning back to the school system in September of last year. Louisiana had a study where 40% of early education teachers showed elevated signs of depression. We know that educators, social workers, human resource staff, folks working with individuals in behavioral health, we know that we are all cut from very similar cloth. We all say that the profession chose us, we did not choose it. And it's because of our own abilities to be empathic and compassionate, to give hope to those around us. Those things that have made us successful at our job are the same things that in this pandemic now act as our Achilles heel. Here's the other reality of COVID-19. Families have also struggled. I want to let you know that the information I'm about to share with you is disturbing. It's bothered me greatly over the course of the pandemic, and I have presented this material, I don't even know how many times, but every time I get to this slide, I feel, as I approach this slide, I feel something start to happen to me. And when I get on this slide and I have to present this material, because it's critical information, it's crucial information, but it is tough information. So I wanted to just say that up front. Here's what we know. In the first 8 weeks of spring of this pandemic, cities like New York City and Philadelphia in Pennsylvania saw a decrease in investigations of almost 50 and 51%, a decrease in suspicions of child abuse and neglect. Here in my state, here in Maine, our call volume as of April of last year was down 32% compared to April of 2019. And so while we might want to try to celebrate the fact that COVID-19 may be the cure for child abuse and neglect, here's what we actually know. While call volume is down, severity of injury is up. We know that our ability as mandated reporters to identify concerns and report them through our proper channels has been severely impacted because of this pandemic. Teachers and healthcare providers, primary care, and those of us working on the front lines of behavioral health, community-based services, our access to be able to see kids and families and share those concerns with authorities have been significantly impacted. Conversely, intimate partner violence has gone through the roof. Call volume to the National Domestic Violence Hotline in March of 2020, in 1 month of this pandemic, went up 6% compared to 2019. And by April of 2020, that call volume was already up 15%. It's not just an issue here in the United States, it's a global issue. The United Nations Population Fund suggested that they will see a worldwide increase of 20% or 15 million additional cases of intimate partner violence. We know that these horrible things are happening because of this pandemic. And while we might know that it's not uncommon in our nation's history to see data points like this peak, I think about Hurricane Harvey back in 2017, and before that, Hurricane Katrina, where, yeah, there were increases of intimate partner violence in those areas impacted by national disasters, hurricanes, stay-at-home orders. But what makes COVID-19 so unique is that it's not isolated to 1 or 2 major metropolitan areas. It's global. And it's not just been a couple weeks or month or even a couple months of shelter in place. It's been a year. The stress levels associated with this pandemic have skyrocketed. The isolation, the lack of resources, and the economic factors that are also attributed to this pandemic, the loss of jobs and complete industries shutting down. And we have also seen in some parts of our country, rates of online alcohol sales increasing upwards of 243%. So you take a smoldering, stressful, dangerous situation and sprinkle alcohol on it, and we all know what happens. Again, I shared with you that this data has an impact on me, and I know it does for many of you. It's forced us to have to think about how to get resources to those that need it, to address the barriers for access, to figure out how do we educate those people that do have access to kids and families in a pandemic. Whether it's your DoorDash drivers, your Amazon delivery drivers, postal carriers and garbage collectors, who does have contact with kids and families, and how do we bring bystander education to the forefront of their work, things that they've probably never had to think about before? How do we manage listeners at home? Another really unfortunate part of this Zoom technology is we all exist in these 3x5 boxes, but you all have no idea what's happening here, 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 or here in my world. It's the same for the individuals we're serving. So how do we embrace nonverbal approaches to safety management, code words, color-coded systems, lighting, strategically placed stuffed animals or coffee mugs that indicate to us somebody is in trouble? It's all about safety planning. And while I believe that 100% of us on this call right now would say that these are essential aspects of working with individuals in a pandemic, managing violence in families in a pandemic, I would also guess that 100% of us feel overwhelmed and fatigued by the thought of continuing to do this, by the thought of continuing to combat this data. That brings us to compassion fatigue. I want to use a definition that Tulane University School of Social Work gives us. They say compassion fatigue is the emotional and physical exhaustion that occurs in aid workers over time, and it results from the impact of secondary trauma from working with others on the front line. The definition I like the best, though, is this third comment. It's the gradual erosion of one's ability to show empathy and compassion towards others. As I shared with you, we all got into this work for very similar reasons. And it's our empathy and our higher than average ability to be compassionate to others around us that drew us to this work. But as you're seeing here, and as I've said, it's that empathy and compassion that can be our Achilles heel. I want to make sure we understand the difference between burnout and compassion fatigue. I think the two get confused often. I think of burnout as being more connected to job satisfaction. Burnout might mean somebody saying, I wish I got paid more. I wish I got more vacation time. I wish I had better supervision. I wish we had more parking. I wish we had better candy in our vending machines. All of those things that are connected to your satisfaction in the workplace, that's burnout. Compassion fatigue is deeper, much deeper. As Tulane University says, compassion fatigue is the gradual erosion over time. I think of the river and the riverbed. I think of the work that we're doing as the river. The river's just flowing like the river always has flown. The river doesn't seek to destroy things around it. The river's just doing what the river's always done. But because the river flows, the riverbeds need attention. And if left unchecked, you can see what happens to our riverbeds. It exposes roots. It changes the environment. It disrupts the entire ecology of the river. You see, I believe, especially now more than ever, that if we're not talking about compassion fatigue and we're not protecting our riverbeds from the work that we do from the river, we're in jeopardy. So it's important that we recognize the signs of compassion fatigue in ourselves, but in each other, the cognitive signs: apathy, having trouble concentrating, trying to be perfect, obsessing over your work's quality, changes over time, the emotional signs, feelings of guilt, anger, sadness, numbness, helplessness, the behavioral changes, changes to appetite, to sleep, elevated startle responses, thinking about those individuals we work with who may have PTSD, that when we come up behind them to say hello or welcome them, they almost jump out of their skin. We can see that in us, in helping professionals who are starting to have their riverbeds get more and more exposed. The physical signs: increased heart rate, challenges with breathing, muscle and joint pain, impaired immune system, feeling sick, feeling under the weather all the time. And just as important as recognizing the signs, we've got to talk about prevention. Work-life balances, assertiveness training, developing good coping skills, finding outlets, creative expression outlets, and focusing on good nutrition, good sleep. Prevention as well as treatment, journaling, support groups, counseling, self-care, all things that evidence shows can combat compassion fatigue. Remember, compassion fatigue is not a light switch. It's not a flash flood in the riverbed. It's a gradual erosion over time, which means we have the ability to see it coming. We have the ability to intervene at numerous points in the process of erosion. But we've got to be talking about it. We've got to be thinking about prevention and treatment. One of my favorite ways to shore up our riverbed, to protect our riverbeds, is to celebrate our success, to take the time and reflect on the mountains that we moved through this pandemic. Thinking about the mountains that you moved individually and as teams at your organizations. Celebrating the things that you achieved that honestly, I never thought we'd do in my work, in my industry. The ability to move complete service lines remote, to continue to serve clients uninterrupted in a virtual space, building the plane literally as we're learning how to fly it. Taking the time individually and together to celebrate those successes is a huge part of shoring up your riverbed. It's also about self-care. And for me, self-care equals resilience. And as I already said, I know that for many of us out there, self-care is a buzzword. It's one more punchline. And for many of us, it's a dirty word. We don't talk about self-care because it has such a negative connotation for us. And I'm here to say, I don't care what we call it. I'm not invested in calling it self-care. I'm here to celebrate resilience. So for me, self-care is resilience. And here's what I know about resilience in the 2021 world. It looks different than it ever has looked before. Self-care is bigger than manicures and pedicures, massage parlors, a yoga class, or a 1-week vacation a year in the tropics. Self-care in 2021 is all about microdosing. It's taking a little bit of something and spreading it out over a long period of time. That's the marathon we're running. I believe that without daily applications of self-care, we risk ourselves, our customers, our coworkers, our loved ones, and our livelihoods. I believe that without thinking of self-care as part of our everyday rituals, like sunscreen or moisturizer, like putting on deodorant or grabbing our car keys, we are at risk. We know we're not going to get far from the house if we don't grab those car keys. And if you're anything like me, come 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, I know if I've forgotten my deodorant that day. I think self-care should be just like that. We should experience what it feels like to have not done enough of it that day. And we should be able to remedy it in the moment with easy, affordable, accessible, and efficient techniques and approaches. Here's a whole variety of ideas that I've used in my own world over the course of the pandemic. Things that don't take money, that may not take a lot of time, or indulgences that I can carve out time for on the weekends. Because again, this is so much bigger than manicures and massages and trips to Cancun and binging on chocolate and wine on the weekends. Self-care for me is about a 4-part plan to elevate our approach to self-care in the pandemic. And it begins with taking stock, tracking stressors at home and at work, recognizing if you're somebody that feels stress in your head or eyes, your jaw, your gut, your hands, your feet. Where do you hold your tension? And doing an exercise where you can start tracking those stressors. Jonathan mentioned at the beginning that I do some work with the University of Maine here in Orono in the School of Social Work. And one of the activities I've done with my students for years is to take a paper plate and literally write everything that they're responsible for on that plate. Their roles, their expectations of themselves or from other people. Put everything that they have to do on that plate and then sit back and reflect. What's on your plate, literally? What can you delegate? What can you say no to? What can you put off for another time? And what are your non-negotiables? What can't you step back from? Step 2 is looking at work-life balances, self-care discoveries. Many of us these days wear devices on our wrists, tell us, get up and move, drink some water. Many of us also live day by day by our calendars with reminders popping up all the time. So how do we leverage that technology? How do we leverage our Outlook calendars and our Fitbits or smartwatches to integrate self-care so it becomes routine, so it doesn't start to feel like one more have to, one more thing on the plate? As adults, I'm thinking many of us no longer have to brush your teeth or put on your deodorant or grab your car keys on our daily to-do lists because it's part of our routine. Again, self-care should start to feel like that. It's just a part of our routine. In step 3, we start to lean in to learning more, discovering more, relaxation training and self-care, learning about mindfulness, making this a priority. So here's my second confession for you all. I've already told you I don't do marathons. My second confession is you will never find me in one of those yoga classes where we're swinging from the ceilings in bed sheets or sitting in 180-degree rooms in hot yoga classes. You're just not going to find me there. But I learned a long time ago that self-care, relaxation, and mindfulness doesn't have to take a checkbook or a certain degree of physical fitness to do. In my world, it can be 3 seconds, 3 deep breaths, a quick pep talk, a quick walk, Because then step 4 is the commitment to that change, making sure that we have made time in our lives for this. And then we make the plan, we build it. In my plan, I think about 4 times during the day where self-care is probably the most important. Again, for me, the pre-encounter, just before something's going to kick off that I may be not looking forward to, or whether it's just parking my car to start the day, anticipating a tough individual session, a tough discussion with a supervisee or my leader, a tough meeting that I might not feel as prepared for. Things I do during, immediately after to celebrate, and ongoing commitments. And then I take those strategies, those techniques, and I plant them firmly in those times. This slide has changed a lot over the last year. I've adjusted some of my strategies when I found that they're no longer having the same effects. But some of my tried and true are still here. I always done with my fidget toys, my finger magnets, to keep my hands busy and discharge some of that nervous energy so it doesn't come through in my voice or my facial expression. Always have my hydration nearby, my waters, my ginger ales, my tea, deep breathing, good self-talk, pep talks, and then rewarding myself in between tough encounters of the day. This is when I turn Hamilton on, blasting, putting a little Taylor Swift on. And remember, when I say walk, that doesn't mean I'm putting on my sneakers and going for a quick 5K around the neighborhood. It's tough enough walking my dogs around the neighborhood these days. For me, a walk is just getting out of this room, getting out of my 3x5 Zoom space, checking the mail, grabbing the garbage pails, or just getting downstairs to refill my water glass. And then my ongoing commitments, what I've committed to over time. Our weekends look very different in my house now. No alarm clocks allowed. Building your plan and adjusting your plan, just like the work you do with individuals in your care. Practice what we preach. Building our plan is an important part of self-care. I want you to think about 4 questions related to this topic. Am I talking about self-care with those around me, the individuals, families, and teams that I'm serving? Have I provided any education on self-care? Have I shared with them my plan? Have I talked about the importance of a self-care plan? Have I modeled self-care? Am I talking about it with coworkers and the partners I'm collaborating with? Have we talked about compassion fatigue? Have we talked about warning signs? Have we talked about interventions? Have I solicited the help of an accountability buddy? Somebody who's going to get my back and I've got theirs. Have I talked about it with my employers to educate and advocate and bring suggestions to the workplace? How to bring self-care into the workspace? Leading us into question 4. How have I created opportunities for self-care in my office, my classrooms, my waiting rooms, my virtual space, my parking lots? I think about a school that I came across over the course of the pandemic in Delaware, elementary school, where they created a self-care walk for staff as well as for students, where they put this signage up that says things like, ask yourself, how does my body feel? Or to remind to choose a calming phrase to repeat. But this school had the thought to also put these signs in the parking lot. So staff were seeing them as they were leaving their car, getting ready for the day, and seeing them again as they got in their car to drive home. Ways to make self-care a norm in the environment. Because again, self-care is all about resiliency. That's the goal. If we were together in person, I would count to 3 and I would ask you all to shout the name of these toys. I'm guessing many of you know or have played with these yourself or have kids that have played with these. Oh, I just saw somebody quick. Yeah, somebody quick. Weebles. These are Weeble Wobbles. And somebody read my mind. If you know the name of these toys, then you also know their tagline. Several of you know it already. Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. If anybody can find me a better kid toy that models what resiliency looks like or means, I'm all ears for it because I haven't found it yet. Weeble Wobbles model resiliency. No matter what's going on in the environment around these little guys, they always get back to vertical. And they weeble and they wobble, but they never fall down and they certainly don't stay down. Weebles teach us that it's possible to always get back to vertical. And there are strategies that we can use every single day to help us get back to vertical. And I'm going to guess that many of you out there who have youth in your life or have families that you're caring for, or that you may be working with individuals are integrated in their homes or their living space, I'm going to guess that this roadmap is filled with things that you do every single day that you don't think of as a resiliency strategy because you do it because it feels best practice or it feels like good parenting or good caretaking. But I want you to pat yourself on the back if you recognize strategies here that you yourself do, because you are doing evidence-based work in resiliency building. You are teaching young people how to get back to vertical. You problem solve together, you check in, you're mindful of screen time, you're finding silver linings and laughing, you're keeping those routines predictable, you're fighting back against the loss of routine and structure, even if it's as simple as a meal plan. What's for dinner every night this week on the fridge? You're modeling the ability to make mistakes and take responsibility and learn from them. You're talking transparently and honestly with one another. You're focusing on self-care. You're teaching them how and when to reach out for help. You are encouraging participation in everyday strategies that build resiliency. You're getting kids back to vertical. Another way to combat compassion fatigue is to make sure we're also taking time to celebrate joy. And one of my personal heroes in this work is Brene Brown. I know her name is probably well known to many of you. But one of the many quotes that Brene has made on this subject is here about joy. She says, joy collected over time fuels resilience, ensuring we'll have reservoirs of emotional strength when hard things do happen. Hard things like this pandemic marathon. There will be a time, hopefully soon, where we will round the corner and we will hear the cheerleaders and the megaphones and the Katy Perry or the Lady Gaga blaring over the speakers. There'll be somebody ready to say our bib number, call our name as we cross this finish line. And when I talk about resiliency, when I talk about the ability to fight back against the four fatigues of COVID-19, what I'm really talking about is finding ways to keep just enough energy in our gas tanks. So when the time comes for our bib number to get called as we cross this marathon finish line, we will have saved just enough energy to not only drag ourselves across the finish line, but to reach out, grab friends and family and coworkers and complete strangers and drag each other across the finish line. Fighting back against the four fatigues and building resiliency is what's going to keep us all vertical as we cross this finish line together. So with that, I want to thank you for the time that you've invested in this conversation. Again, we will get slides to you, but I want to make sure, and I think we've saved some time, that if there are questions or comments or thoughts, now is certainly the time to do that. For some reason, Marissa, I'm sorry, I keep raising my hand like a false alarm. Are there any questions or comments for anybody out there?
Chris, I'll just say, and I don't know if I'm sort of speaking for everybody, but I think there's a lot of comments in here that reflect this, which is that I think you've put together a presentation here that really touches people right where they are. I know I felt myself several times throughout the presentation just chuckling because I could see myself in what you're presenting, and or just feeling that feeling in my gut when you're putting up the stats about the increase in abuse cases. That it's just very real. The work that we do is very real, and we're all human doing it, and so it's so important to be able to take these times to just allow ourselves that that humanity, and to just again to check in with ourselves, to keep ourselves fresh, and support one another. I think that's the other really key thing here. Is I'm hoping that people will take away from this is we have an opportunity at CSNI to be able to provide this out to our membership, so that you all can take this and have those conversations locally too. And so I'm really grateful for you putting this together for us, Chris, and really to all of you who attended today, and for your thoughts, the chat, your attention, and your attention to yourselves, so that you can be there and ready to serve the people that we're here to support.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate everything you said, and you're spot on. I mean, this, you said at the very beginning, this time was for you all, and I truly mean that. This work, this marathon that everyone is running, so many folks out there depend on our ability to keep running it and to stay vertical on this course. And so I hope that there has been nuggets of this. And again, the slides will come out. And what I often have found is that when people see it in writing, it also triggers some additional thoughts and ideas. I'm very comfortable. My email is here. I'm very comfortable with folks reaching out and asking more questions, or wanting to dig deeper in any of these topics. I'm happy to share resources that I've collected over the year, or if there are pieces here that people want to learn or seek out more information on themselves, I'm happy to point people in the right direction. But it's really about our ability collectively as a field, as an industry, to stay vertical and keep supporting those around us.
Well, thank you so much again, Chris. And, I certainly, just looking through all the chat, it's pretty clear how much people appreciate that. And like Jonathan said, how much your message resonates with everybody. We're all experiencing this as humans for the first time, and we're doing the best that we can. And I think that that's all that we can do. So I really, really appreciate your message. For everybody who registered today, I will get the slides out to you. We will additionally, we have recorded this, and we will be putting this up on the csni.org website as soon as we can. So thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate your time, and appreciate you jumping on.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Take care.
Bye-bye.